All right, we're going to work through this example here. It says, the precedence table below outlines the steps required to make a cup of coffee. So here are all the activities that we need to follow when making a cup of coffee. We've also got the duration of each of these activities. For instance, filling the kettle takes 10 seconds, when boiling the water takes 300 seconds, putting coffee in the cup takes 5 seconds, and so on. We've also got our column called predecessors, and this tells us the sequence we need to follow when making a cup of coffee. So, what is the order? There's obviously some order here. You can't start with stirring. That doesn't make any sense. Stirring is going to be our last step. Nor can you start with, put milk in the cup. There's steps before that. All right, so the predecessor is going to tell us what we have to do before a certain activity, immediately before a certain activity. All right, so let's read this through and see if it makes sense to us. Where I'm first going to draw your attention to is here and here. Do you see this is where we've got dashes? Now, these dashes tell us that there are no immediate predecessors to A, filling the kettle, and C, putting coffee in the cup. So can I get you to do this? Can I get you to draw some arrows here? And what I want you to write here is no predecessor. Now, if there's no predecessor to a certain step, that means it's where we're starting. So when you think about it, when you're making a cup of coffee, the first thing that you do is fill the kettle and put coffee in a cup. That's the first thing you do. There's nothing you have to do before that. And that's why there are no predecessors to this step, to these steps. All right, let's keep on going. If we come to B, B says boil the water. It takes 300 seconds, and the predecessor to this step is A. So that means before you can boil the water, you need to fill the kettle. And hopefully that should just make intuitive sense to you. It makes sense that the predecessor to this step, boiling the water, is making sure you have water in the kettle. So hopefully that makes sense. We've already dealt with C here. That was our starting point. Let's go to D, which says put milk in a cup. This takes 5 seconds. And the predecessor to this step is C, which is put coffee in the cup. So that means before you can put milk in the cup, you must put coffee in the cup. And then we keep on going. What about E? E is saying pour water into the cup. It's going to take 5 seconds. And you see how we have two predecessors here? We have B and D. That means before you can pour water into the cup, you have to B, and that is make sure the water is boiled. That makes sense. And also D, you need to make sure you have milk in the cup as well. That's what you have to do before you pour water into the cup. And then lastly, you have F, which is stir, and that's going to take 3 seconds. And our predecessor is E, so that means immediately before this, you need to make sure that you've poured water into the cup. And hopefully, again, that should make intuitive sense. Otherwise, you've got nothing to stir. You need to make sure you've poured water into the cup before you start stirring. Another thing I want to draw your attention to here is the fact that this letter F here does not appear in any of my predecessors, does it? This letter F does not appear anywhere in this column of predecessors. So can I get you to write the following? Can I get you to write here that, well, that's the ugliest arrow I've ever seen. Let's try again. What I want you to write here is not a predecessor to anything. Now, if it's not a predecessor to anything, what does that mean? That means this is where we finish. This is the finish part. So this is where we finish when we get to something which is not a predecessor to anything. And we know that we're starting when something has no predecessors. So if you have no predecessors, that means that's where you're starting. And if you're not a predecessor to anything, that's where you're finishing. And that's how to make sense of this precedence table here. What we're now going to see in our next part is how we take this information and we put it into this right here. So I'll see you in the next part.